Our gospel reading for this morning comes from the 10th chapter of Luke, as Jesus is on his journeys and encounters a pair of sisters. Listen to what the Spirit may speak to us through these words. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Here in the church office, we have a staff meeting every week on Tuesday morning. And 2 times a month, we have what we refer to as an extended staff meeting. And in that extended part of the meeting, we spend a great deal of time meditating on Scripture. Most often, we use a practice known as Lectio Divina, where we read a passage of Scripture and simply listen for a word or phrase that may strike us. There is a time of silence where we can simply be attentive to any way in which the passage touches us. The passage is read again a couple of more times, and there are more times of silence in which to meditate and reflect and contemplate why it was we heard a particular phrase or word, and how that word may be God speaking to us or attempting to direct our lives in some way. Now, a couple of weeks ago, as we were finishing up in that time of silent reflection and beginning to share with one another the things we had heard or had experienced, I was struck with what an odd practice this was in terms of a typical workplace. If someone were to come in and see us doing it, they would probably think it rather strange. Here we were, a group of employees, on the clock, if you will, and aside from occasional breaks in the silence when the passage was read aloud, no one appears to be doing much of anything, at least not as doing tends to be thought of. In the typical workplace, this would be quite the odd practice. I can't imagine many places of employment where this kind of thing goes on, and for that matter, I'm not sure that it goes on with that much regularity in churches. Churches are busy places, after all. There's lots of stuff to do, lots of things that need to be done. There's limited amounts of time available to be unproductive. Mary is being rather unproductive in our scripture passage this morning when Jesus stops by to visit her and her sister Martha. Mary also steps outside the normal role for women in that day and time. Sitting at Jesus' feet is the typical pose, the stereotypical pose of a disciple studying under a rabbi, and that was something only men were allowed to do. Meanwhile, as Martha does those things that one has to do when company comes over, as she seeks to fulfill the biblical admonition to be hospitable, to show hospitality to the traveler, she gets more and more frustrated as Mary just sits there, not doing anything to help. Now, this is a simple little story that wrestles with some difficult issues. Unfortunately, there's a tendency to reduce the story to either or, right or wrong choices. But as many have pointed out, if no one fixes supper, what are Mary and Jesus going to eat? And I'm pretty sure they didn't have takeout or fast food available at that time. And our Bible translation is not necessarily as much help as it might be here. Speaking of Martha distracted by her many tasks, has prompted a number of people to portray Martha as a harried Martha Stewart type, overly obsessed with making sure everything is just so. But her tasks are more usually translated as service or even as ministry. And they're the root of our word, deacon. And our translation misses a second chance to note this by not translating Martha's complaint to Jesus in what seems to me to be a much more straightforward, word-for-word fashion. Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me alone to serve? It's worth noting that Jesus uses that very same word to describe himself. At the Last Supper, when the disciples get into an argument about which of them will be regarded as the greatest, Jesus tells them that whoever wants to be great, whoever wants to be leader, must become one who serves. And he adds, I am among you as one who serves. Jesus expects those who follow him to become like him, to become those who serve. So why then does he rebuke Martha and say that Mary has chosen the better part? I think this is one of those places where those either or, good or bad dichotomies may mislead us. Indeed, there are people who say that this passage elevates contemplation above service. But saying that requires reading this passage in isolation, ignoring the rest of Luke's gospel, along with its companion volume, Acts. So what are we to do with this tension between service and sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to his words? A moment ago, I spoke of the church staff practicing Lectio Divina, listening and meditating to Scripture, a form of sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to him, if you will. And I wondered if someone were to come in on one of these mornings when we're doing this and come in and find the office empty and barge into the meeting where we were and demand that we quit wasting time and get back to doing all those things that needed doing, what would Jesus do? And I feel quite certain that he would respond as he does to Martha. He would say that we were doing precisely what we needed to be doing. But if we came into the office every day and spent the entire day reading Scripture, praying, and meditating, I'm just as sure that Jesus would have a word with us about service. Serving and sitting at Jesus' feet are two sides of the same discipleship coin. So the real issue is not which one is right or which one is better. The issue is, how do we fully answer our call to be disciples? And on this issue, I think that Martha's experience may be quite helpful to us. When Martha welcomes Jesus into her home, when she seeks to play gracious host, presumably she wants to do this for Jesus. But as she grows angry with Mary's failure to help, she seems to totally lose sight of this. She snaps at Jesus. She demands to know why he does not care about her and orders him to correct the situation. She abandons all pretense of serving and caring for Jesus, and she demands that Jesus care for and serve her. And when Jesus gently rebukes her, he says that she is worried and distracted by many things. He also adds, there is need of only one thing. And I don't think Jesus means that that one thing is sitting at his feet. Rather, I think that one thing is a total devotion to and focus on Jesus, on God. Martha clearly loses that focus when she jumps in the face of the very one she is supposedly wanting to serve. But the same could be said for a life of contemplation and prayer and worship that was entered into merely for the warm spiritual buzz that it offered. When Jesus ceases to be at the center of Christian service or Christian spirituality, things are beginning to get off track. There are faith traditions where this tends to happen more on the contemplative side, and I suspect that it happens some today in the current fascination with spirituality. But in the typical Presbyterian church, there is more often more of a Martha problem. We tend to be more focused on the work of running and managing and orchestrating all of those church activities. But in the midst of all of that busyness, it is easy to lose sight of Jesus. It is easy for all of that activity and busyness to become more about us than about Jesus. And when that happens, Jesus speaks to us just as he did today in our scripture. Martha, Martha, James and Diane, Joe and Tom, Sally and Jane, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. What is the one thing at the very center of your life? What is the one thing at the very center of the life of this congregation, at the center of the activities and groups and events that you are a part of here? It is easy to get a little uncentered now and then. All of us do so from time to time. But Jesus keeps calling us back. Follow me, he says. Keep me at the very center, and everything else will fall into place. Thanks be to God.